Hey everybody, welcome to another Dorico video, and this time I'm going to be covering time signatures. Time signatures in Dorico do two important things. One, they just tell the performer how many beats in the measure there are and organize the bar lines, but they're also responsible with beaming and beat grouping, aka how the music appears on the page. And I've learned some really nifty things about this, and also some really, I kind of consider them secrets about time signatures in Dorico, which frankly, I couldn't actually even find in the help documentation. So these are really helpful if you're doing advanced music with, say, altered time signatures, altered time feels like, say, 3-3-2-2, that kind of thing. And so these are really helpful, and hopefully you'll find it useful. So here we are with time signatures in Dorico Pro. So what I have pulled up first here is a saxophone quartet I wrote called Trafalgar Tango, and this one is based on whole tone scales, and it's kind of a fun piece that's available if you're interested in checking it out for your saxophone quartet. But this piece has not only just regular time signatures, but it also has some advanced time signatures. And this is where I really did my deep dive into converting this from a finale file into a Dorico project. So the first thing about time signatures is in Dorico that the shortcut is Shift-M for meter. And the reason that they use meter is because, again, Dorico is really using the time signature as a way of organizing the notation, aka beat groupings and beaming. So if you're not familiar with the conventions of beaming and beat grouping, the most important thing about this in music is that when we're talking about beaming, we want to represent the beats of the music, and not necessarily the mathematical beats, but the pulse. So if we had a piece, say, in 5 that was chukka-ta-chukka-ta-tut-tut, we would want to beam the notes so that it represents those strong beats. And by representing a strong pattern, the performers can more easily interpret the music and count better. Because again, it's more important that we think about the pulse of the music and not necessarily the mathematical 1, 2, 3, 4s. That's not really that important. So whenever we want to talk about time signatures, the first thing we need to do is go into the notation options in Dorico. So that's going to be Shift-Command-N on our Mac, or it's under the library menu under notation options. Now you'll see two different areas here in Dorico. First one you're going to see is the beam grouping. The beam grouping is how beamed notes, aka 8th notes, 16th notes, 32nd notes, and beyond are treated in various types of time signatures. To be clear, you can see over here on the right, you can change this per the flow of your composition. So this piece has 3 movements, so I have 3 different flows for the 3 different movements. And it's important to do each of the movements as a flow because in this case, all 3 movements have different time signatures. You have the first movement in 4/4, the second movement, T time, is in 3, and then the third movement is in 5. And so I want to beam things differently per the type of time signature. And so that's why it's important to make these adjustments as you go along. Now there's a whole bunch of options here, but I want to point out a couple of ones that if you're like me and you have kind of a picky way you want things, there's some ones to really watch out for. The first ones are these allow cross beats beaming, because in 3/4, for example, I don't want all 6 8th notes beamed together. That to me looks weird, so I'd like to break them at the beams. But I am okay with beaming together whole groups of notes, so say 2 quarter notes in 3/4 or 2 quarter notes in 4/4, we can beam those together. But I don't like triplets beamed to regular 8th notes. I think that's very confusing. And I also would prefer to have separation on secondary beat groups. You can see down here the cross beats so that there. And then I might also choose to have the broken apart 16th notes if the piece was in 6/8. But my piece is not in 3/8 or 6/8, it's in 3/4, so I don't really have that issue. Down here, you'll see in 4/4 time, you have the option for 2 groups or the half measure when it comes to the beaming, or all 4 quarter notes broken apart. And then you have this one, which I think is so crucial. No beaming over rests, please. It's so hard to read. And then the final one here, and this one is very 50-50, but most of the time I actually choose to do the one lone eighth note separate from the other two so that the and a one and beat two would be separated. I think that's a little cleaner because I think sometimes when you see three eighth notes beamed together, your mind automatically thinks triplet. The rest of these options are pretty specialized if you're doing some really fancy and advanced music, which is not going to happen in this video. So let's bring ourselves down to the note groupings. Now, note groupings are how all of the music within a time signature are put together. You have the idea of that imaginary bar line in 4/4. Remember how we had two beats of beats 1 and beat 2 separated from beats 3 and 4, and how would we like that to be treated? Now, to me, I really think that's an important element when notating in common time, and so I want that split. So for example, this dotted quarter note on beat 2, that to me is very, very confusing. So I would much prefer to have that tie across. I am okay, though, with having a dotted half note, for example, and you can see I have that option chosen. Down here, again, a simple thing like a half note, everybody figures that out. I'm okay with it, but I don't want syncopated half notes, and I would like to have my beat grouping. You can see here, because this note is on the and of 1, I sort of like this notation over the other one. But that's kind of a specialized case, because I would probably renotate this measure anyway, but that's the way I like to use it. There's also this checkbox here, use common time note groupings for cut time. And so just to be clear, if you're doing 2/2 or cut time, you can have it look like 4/4, which is what most people do anyway. So I would normally choose that if the piece was in that, but mine is just in 4/4, so it's kind of irrelevant. You can see here, I like this option for having a dotted quarter note on 1 and not having this kind of lone tie there. I think that's a little confusing. And then there's some other things as you're going along, like the written out duples in 6/8. I prefer the dotted notes over the tied notes. Again, I think it looks kind of confusing. And how it breaks apart notes in these kind of irregular time signatures. And in this case, again, I'm not doing that kind of time signature, but I prefer it broken out if I have that kind of beat grouping. There's one other really important checkbox I want to show you, which is the grouping for 5/4. Now, this sometimes has to be changed anyway, depending on how you wrote your music, but you can see it does irregular compound, meaning it thinks of it as a dotted half note or a bar of 3/4 followed by a bar of 2/4, all mashed together to make 5/4, or it can think of it like 4/4, where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beats. And this is a really important one depending on your piece, and so that's a really great option that will really help you out with your beaming later, and I'll show you that when we go down to the movement in 5. Finally, you have these syncopated options where do you want notes to be quarter notes off the beat, or do you want them to be all tied eighth notes? And then you have this one here, which I think is really important. Do we split that quarter note on the and of 2 so that we preserve the first half, second half, which I choose, but I do like having offbeat quarter notes. And then finally, a couple of last little beats having to deal with this last one here, which again, I think the offbeat dotted quarter note is really weird in 4/4, so I prefer this option. So again, when you're going through these are really important options to set. And if you start notating your music and you think, man, this looks really weird, this is the place to go, is the notation options, and you want to look at beaming, and you want to look at the note groupings, because that's where you're going to correct most of the errors in your beaming and in your notation. So back here in the music, we have some options on time signatures. Now, there's a really important note I want to make about time signatures, and that is Dorico will allow you to insert a time signature anywhere in a measure. Now that seems very counterproductive, but if you were writing along in 5 and you realized, I really want to break this measure up into something irregular like 2 bars of 2 and a bar of 1 or something like that, you can actually place a time signature change anywhere in the measure. And so you need to be very careful when you're adding a time signature change not to be clicked in, say, the middle of the measure like I'm about to do, because guess what? If I go into the tool, which is Shift M, and I go 4/4, it will put in a time signature right where I told it to. This also creates a little bit of an issue because you can see it rebeamed and renotated all of the music up until I came to my first double bar, because double bars in Dorico reset time signatures. But you can see what happened was it created two orphan measures. Now, if you're doing, say, the old style classical and Baroque technique where the pickup bar is its own little bar at the front, and then the bar at the end of the repeat sign is a partial bar because the rest of it is up here at the beginning, that's a way of doing that in Dorico, which is good if you're wanting to do something like that. But for most of us, that's really kind of a complicated thing. So be very careful that when you're adding a time signature, you are on the beginning of the measure so that you don't end up with something like this where I have two orphan bars, a bar of 2 and a bar of 2, and you'll notice it didn't put in a time signature to tell me it was a bar of 2. So again, that's just a really important thing to note. Another important thing to note is that by default, Dorico is going to change every single stave in your score to the new time signature when you enter it by default. But you can actually change an individual part to a new time signature if you want. The way you do this, and this was one of the secrets that I found, because I could not find this in the documentation, which I thought was kind of frustrating. But if you select a measure in one of your parts, say the bari sax part, and let's say I want this written in 2/4 because I want them to pulse in a certain way, I can go ahead and go into the time signature tool again, Shift M. I can enter in 2/4, and remember in Dorico you have to use the little slash to denote the numerator from the denominator, and that's how it enters in time signatures. But before I hit the enter key, if on Mac, if I hit Option and then hit the enter or return, you'll get just the 2/4 in that part, and you will see it rebeamed that part into 2, but it left all the other parts in 4. And this was so helpful when I found it, because when you're trying to do pieces like, say, the Holst suites, where you have something in 3 against something in 6, you need a way of changing it per the staff you're selecting. And so you have to go into the tempo tool again, and you're going to hold down that Option Enter, and that's how you tell it only for this part, please. Now you can select more than one part when you do this, so you can actually do it for, say, 3 different parts at once. But again, when you do that Option Enter, it's going to change just what you have selected. It also works if you select a range, you can select just a part of a piece and change just that part. So again, when we're entering in time signatures, we need to go in and we need to hit the Shift M to get us in, and then we need to do the numerator, followed by the slash, and then the denominator. And then if we hit enter, it changes everyone, but if we hit the Option Enter, it changes just the part we have selected. Now there's another element to Dorico in beaming that I think is really, really cool, which is you can tell Dorico how you want your notes to be grouped if you have, say, a complicated rhythmic figure. So let's go to the third movement of my piece, which is entitled In and Out, which is in 5 and has an altered time feel. So now let's take a look at how to use the time signature to improve our beaming and beat grouping in a complex time signature, in this case 5/4. Now a lot of times in 5/4 we have a specific type of pulse, like 3 + 3 + 4, chaka-ta, something like that. And so we want the beaming of the notes to reflect that kind of notation. Now by default, you can see here in Dorico, my movement in 5, it has these very unusual beam groupings. It's grouping notes in groups of 6, which is not really what I want. Now I could go in and I could manually select the note after where I want the break to be, and I could go under beaming and I could say split beam. But that would mean I would have to go through the entire movement and change every single beam that no longer fits with my grouping, which is not what I'm looking for. So what I want to try and do is use beaming to help me get this to work right. And to do it, what we need to do is change the time signature. Now, the first thing we can do is we could try and use a eighth note denoted time signature. Because remember, since we're thinking of threes, chukka to tut tut like that, there's a really strong probability that if we notated it in, say, 10-8, it would fix the problem. So let's go ahead and try that first. Now that worked pretty well. However, you can see down here on my bottom line, it really messed up the bari sax part. It's now very confusing because you have tied on beat eighth notes, which doesn't make any sense. So we need to kind of split the difference here, because we really liked the way the eighth notes were kind of grouped together, but you can see here these don't make any sense at all because it's doing 4 plus 3 plus 3, which is not what we're looking for. So one thing we can do is when we enter in the time signature, we can actually tell Dorico the kinds of beat groupings we're looking for. So in this case, we're looking for 3 plus 3 plus 2 plus 2. And so if I go back into the time signature tool, I put in a bracket, and then I choose 3 plus 3 plus 2 plus 2, and then closing bracket over 8, you'll see that it's actually going to change the beat groupings. And look at that. Now it looks much, much more like the way we want it to be notated. And so we can kind of scroll along and see, yeah, so far everything looks really good. But when we get to letter D here, we have a problem, because at letter D, the bari sax is playing quarter, 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 quarter. So in this case, we would like that part to be a little bit different. So here we have a couple of options. We could keep experimenting with entering in a time signature that really fits what we're looking for, or we could put in just a system time signature for just this little section, and we can actually hide the time signature so that we can make this part look the way we want, and then it'll go back to the other time signature when it gets there. So I'm going to select this first section here where the bari sax plays nothing but quarter notes, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to insert a time signature for just that part. Again, we're going to go Shift M, and then I'm going to tell it I want 5/4 because I want to see those quarter notes. But again, I'm going to hold down Option before I hit Enter. And so now you can see that that part is written in 5/4. Now, if I don't want that player to see that, if I want them to just read the music the way it is, I can go to my Properties panel, which is the little up arrow on the bottom there, and I can hit Hide Time Signature with that 5/4 selected. And now you can see Dorico put in a signpost, so I know as the Dorico user that there's a time signature change there, but you can see that the notation looks seamless, and now the bari sax part is beamed and note grouped the way I want, and all the other parts look the way they should look. And this is a really powerful tool in Dorico to get the kind of things you're looking for. Now, there's a couple of things I want to make note of. The first one is, notice, wait a minute, the soprano sax part has a different hidden time signature. Where did that come from? And the time signature tool can be a little bit frustrating in Dorico. One of the most important things is, if you're trying to figure out if there's a time signature change that you can't visually see, if you click on a bar line, it will tell you if there's anything to do with the time signature. And you can see that I have a hidden time signature on that bar. But if I click on the alto part, there's no hidden time signature. Nothing happened there. And so one of the things you need to get used to in Dorico is that if I click on this hidden time signature and I hit the delete button, it actually won't get rid of it, which is very frustrating. You actually need to right click on it and hit cut. And if you do that, Dorico will actually clear it out, and so now there is no longer a hidden time signature. You'll also know something's fishy is when you click on a bar line where all the time signatures match up, you'll see that by default every single bar line is selected. But if I come down here where I have the 5/4 in the bari sax part, when you can see when I click on these three, they're still grouped, but this one is now broken apart. And so the only way to make them whole again would be to click on this hidden time signature, right click and hit cut, which removes it, re-beams it the way it was, but now all the parts are working together. So if you do put in those hidden time signatures like that, you do need to remember that if you need to clear them out, you will have to click on the bar line to figure out where they are. You can hide them or unhide them, but then you need to right-click and use the cut command. So the last thing I want to show you about time signatures is how you can add in alternate time signatures, things like mixed meter, like say 2 + 3 / 8, or what they call alternating or interchangeable time signatures. So an alternating time signature is where you have 3 4 4 4 3 4 4 4, where it's a consistent pattern. And when you do that, that is going to automatically have Dorico put in the beat groupings and the bar lines the way you want them. To add an alternating time signature, what you're going to do is you're going to go into the time signature tool, Shift-M, and you are going to put in your first time signature. I'm going to do 5/4, and then I'm going to do +, 10/8. And now it's going to beam the notes per the time signature every other bar. Now it's not going to print the new time signature every other bar like sometimes is done. That you'd actually have to do by hand, but in this case it's going to make the beat groupings or the bar lines match up with that plus. Now if I wanted to do an interchangeable time signature, meaning I don't have to tell the performer which time signature they're in, the beats groupings will tell them automatically. In that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the tool and I'm going to put in the first one, 5/4, then I'm going to put in another slash and I'm going to go 10/8. Now this one, under the properties panel, you can change how it's displayed. So you can do the parentheses, you can do equal signs, you can do a whole bunch of different types. But what this does is it says, hey, look at the beat grouping, that'll tell you which time signature you should be using at what given time. There's also the additive time signature, which is, this is a very literal kind of 2 + 3 + something kind of time signature. In this case, again, time signature tool, we're not going to use the brackets. When we use the brackets, that's just beat groupings. But if I was to say 2 + 4 + 2/8, this is going to put in that time signature, and then Dorico is going to be much more literal about how it puts in the notes. And you can see that actually took me out of my 10/8 feel because I only put in 8/8 notes. So the final time signature I want to show you is the time signature of no bar lines, which would be an X. So if you just go X in the time signature tool, that's going to remove all the bar lines and most of the groupings, and it's just going to leave you with an open palette. Say that you're trying to do a cadenza or something where you really don't want to be hamstrung by specific note values, and this would be the kind of time signature for that. So I hope this was useful for you. Remember to keep looking back at the channel, checking out for more Dorico help videos. And also, if you're interested, check out my Patreon page. I have a lot of information going up there about music, about media, about saxophone things, and as well as I'm going to have some Dorico specific things as well. If you become a member, you're going to be entered to win a drawing for a Theo Wani mouthpiece if you're a saxophone player, and it really just helps me provide more content for the channel. So keep checking back there, and thanks so much for watching.